Hey everybody, Ray here. I wanted to do a video today to kind of talk about something that happened in my Twitch stream last night. We were talking, we were going all ethereal mind, pulling ideas out of the ether and plotting and speculating on what might be happening in game number 2, some plot devices and stuff like that. And so I threw out a name that everybody hates to talk about in the Final Fantasy VII fandom, Genesis. So, but hear me out. I think this might be, we might be onto something here. And the chat thought so too. Everybody kind of came around. They were like, oh, you might be onto something there. And people were coming in later in the chat and they were like, oh man. And they were like, tell them about the Genesis theory. So I'm going to tell all of you all about it. So if you don't know who Genesis is, Genesis Rhapsodos is a character from Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core. That was the Zach Fair story. If you haven't played it on PSP, it's fantastic. Find a way to play it if you have to emulate it or whatever. But so the concept of the character Genesis is super dope. The execution of that character in that game was not. I'll be the first to admit, I felt like the voice acting for the character was kind of lazy. I don't like the poetic villains. I think they're done to death. I think you could repackage that villain. He was a part of the Genova. There were two Genova projects, Genova S, Genova G. Genova S used all the parts and DNA and cellular structure from failed Genova project specimens, and that's what Sephiroth comes from. There's this thing called cellular degradation. They talk about it in Final Fantasy VII Remake briefly when Hojo was talking. I think he's talking to Cloud. He's talking about cellular degradation among soldier members. So that definitely ties back into Crisis Core. That was the main theme of Crisis Core. That was the motivation of Genesis to figure out, because he was Project G. And they talk about, Hojo talks about the S and G Genova cells in Final Fantasy VII Remake. First little tick, first little ding. You know what I mean? That got me thinking. Because they specifically said, the S cells and the G cells. So right there, Sephiroth and Sephiroth and Genesis. The S cells are Sephiroth, the G cells are meant to represent Genesis because he was known as G for a long time. In Dirge of Cerberus, that takes place 3 years after Final Fantasy VII, 1 year after Advent Children, you collect, I think it's 3 G Project files, and it unlocks this extra ending, this bonus ending for Dirge of Cerberus. And in that bonus ending, Whis, the deep ground soldier that you fight around the end of the game, he is in this cavern area underneath of Midgar in an old part, and then you see this rupture and everything, and then Genesis appears, comes, reclaims his fallen former comrade. Now, before I get any further down that rabbit hole, what you need to understand about that scene is at the end of Crisis Core, Genesis, you defeat Genesis and everything, and then at the end, his cellular degradation is healed, and he's approached, I think it's by Nero and Whis, the deep ground soldiers in that game, to come be part of their rebellion and all that kind of stuff in the deep ground laboratories, where his G cells were used to experiment on different human beings and stuff like that. We saw a taste of that. We've already seen a taste of that in Final Fantasy VII Remake. One of the underground labs underneath Midgar, those ruined specimens, those failed experiments, I believe those are going to be G-type cellular structure soldiers and human experimentation. I think that's why they look so funky. I think that's why they look so weird, so different than like the S experimentations that you see walking around in the black hoods and stuff like that. Like Marco and then the guy on the playground in Sector 5. They look like just sick people. These things in the Shinra basement are abominations. They don't even look human anymore. You know what I mean? So I think that's going to be the difference between S and G. So, that catches us up a little bit with like Genesis and his relationship to Deep Ground and the experimentation and all that kind of stuff. Genesis grew up with a character named Angeal, and the two of them and Sephiroth had like a bit of a bond because they were all actually experimenting on together. And I'm going to do a separate video for Genesis talking about kind of his origin and all that kind of stuff. So I won't get into that in this video, but if you're interested in it, that's going to be coming later today too, as a companion piece to this video. Genesis in Crisis Core is the one who tells Sephiroth about the truth of his parentage, like the truth about Jenova. Like Sephiroth's only heard the name of his mother. You know, he's under the impression that his mother died when he was a baby or whatever the story is there. He only knows his mother's name. Genesis is the one that tells Sephiroth the truth about Jenova and himself while they're in the Nibelheim reactor. Zack's like, don't tell him. He tells him anyway. Sephiroth goes mad. You know the rest of the story. Genesis came to Sephiroth because his cellular degradation had begun. So he wanted some of Sephiroth's cells to heal that process, to make it not happen. Sephiroth's basically like, you can go rot somewhere. You can go rot in hell, buddy. Fast forward years later, that's the relationship, butting heads, kind of competitive rivalry between Genesis and Sephiroth. He's not as powerful as Sephiroth, but he's just like a couple rungs under the ladder from him. So, with all that being said, onto the theory. So, Genesis, when he was approached by Whis and Nero, he says no, he's not going to be part of this rebellion against Shinra. So he puts himself into a slumber underneath of Midgar, in that place where you see that bonus scene from Dirge of Cerberus. He puts himself into this slumber. It's not clear, like if he's like, you know, physically asleep there, or if he's in like this other dimension or whatever. But you see like this whole awakening sequence and whatever. So during that period, okay, that chronologically, that is the last part of the compilation that we had up to that point. Now, they have said in the Ultimania interview, Kitase, Nomura, Nojima, they all confirm in that Ultimania interview that this game currently coming out right now, Final Fantasy VII Remake, was always intended to be the last or next whatever part of the compilation. It was all going to head up to this. So, with that understanding, the final line of Genesis, chronologically, the final line spoken in Final Fantasy VII compilation is Genesis saying, "It's not yet time for slumber. There's still much work to be done, brother." His wing, he sprouts a wing off his left shoulder, just like Sephiroth's comes off of the right shoulder. He says, brother. Is he talking to Sephiroth? What has he been doing the whole time? My theory is, if he's been asleep all of that time under Midgar, maybe he's been conversing with the planet. Now, he's not an ancient. It's not like that. But he has felt the life stream. He has been at least exposed, touched by the life stream, because you see that scene in Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core when you beat him with Zack, the final confrontation. He goes to approach this goddess. I forget what the name of the character is, but whatever. And he is pulled away, and he is in contact with the life stream. It's after that the Genesis character changes. He changes after that. He's approached by Deep Ground. He says, I don't want any part of that. You know, I don't want to be part of a rebellion or anything. I'm going to go and sleep underneath Midgar. I'm just going to go into slumber. My theory is he has been conversing with the planet, right? So the scene where he wakes up is 1 year after Advent Children. In Advent Children, when Sephiroth disappears after he fights Cloud and all that kind of stuff, Sephiroth says, I will never be a memory. Okay, now, if the current theory is true that there are two Sephiroths in the timeline, And this is me listening to my chat, everybody telling me in the chat, and it does make a certain amount of sense to me. If there are two Sephiroths, like the one you talk to at the very end of the game, like Sephiroth Prime, you know what I mean? And the one that you see appearing in the game is the one tied to that timeline. But the one you talk to at the end of the game is like the one from Advent Children, you know? Like he's more chummy. Like he's more, hey, I need you to help me do this and do that and everything. Okay, that's Sephiroth. What if Genesis has been speaking with Sephiroth? What if Genesis is the one that has figured out stuff about the Whispers and all this kind of stuff? Because he says there's still much work to be done, brother. What does Sephiroth say to Cloud? He says there's still so much work to be done. That is Genesis' line that he's telling Sephiroth at the end of Dirge of Cerberus.
We still have much work to do, my brother.
Cloud, there's still so much to be done.
Genesis is telling Sephiroth at the end of Dirge of Cerberus, there's still much work to be done, brother. And he flies off with the body of Whis. What happens after that, we don't know. But it's exactly what Genesis tells Sephiroth. And at the time, we had no idea. We thought maybe we were getting a sequel with Genesis as the villain. We didn't know what was happening with that. And then you got the backstory of Crisis Core and explains all this other stuff. If you pay attention, it explains a lot about Genesis. Forget the whole poetic villain thing. They can retcon that. They can retcon that. He doesn't have to be that character anymore. But I think this could be something they can sink their teeth into. Because they've with that line from Sephiroth and with the G and S cells comment, there's all these little tidbits. There's all these little tidbits in there saying that this could happen. And, he has Genova cells. He has Genova cells. He would have to be part of the reunion. He would have to be a part of the reunion now. Anybody with those Genova cells, Zack, Genesis, all this kind of stuff. And that's something else. We now know Zack's alive. We now know that Zack is alive. And in some form or another, my theory is that he's still in like one of Shinra's basements. They reacquired him. Hojo's got him on ice, waiting to activate him, just like they did with Cloud. So there's going to be this wild kind of like coming to a head with these characters. They're doing something. They're doing something. They're going to string all these characters together in some way. And I have nothing to base this on, but I think Vincent might have something to do with the Genesis storyline in Remake Part 2. If they go, I think Genesis is a strong possibility. I think Vincent might have something to do with it, because when he went on ice, it was like 25 or 30 years before the beginning of Final Fantasy VII. How old are Sephiroth and Genesis and all these guys? They're like late 20s. So they would have been born, or give or take a year, around the time that Vincent goes on ice. I don't think that's going to be a coincidence. I don't think that will be a coincidence. Now, Vincent was nothing special when he went on ice, right? When Hojo shoots him and then locks him in the Shinra basement and experiments on him, does this weird stuff to him, he's not special until that. But he fuses with chaos. He fuses with chaos, and not anybody can do that. So there's something else about Vincent there. And just based on their look, wearing red, the darker hair, Genesis kind of has aesthetically a Vincent vibe about him. You know what I mean? So that's really all I want to talk about with the whole Genesis theory. I think it's a crazy, wild concept. His connection with Sephiroth, his origins. he is a big part of the Genova project, and just the fact about the quote, and they mentioned the S and G cells right from Hojo's mouth. There's something going on with Genesis, and I think Genesis is going to be revealed as the one who let Advent Children level Sephiroth in on the whispers and what's going on, because I think Genesis is the type of character that would, when he put himself in that slumber, he listened to the planet. He has been in the live stream. He has been a part of the live stream, and he came back. So, and the Crisis Core showed us that. It showed us he was touched by the live stream, and he did come back. Genesis remains. He just remains. So, post your comments. Let me know what you all think about that. If you dig that theory, please give the video a like, share it around, subscribe to the channel. I've got that Genesis companion piece coming later on today because I think this is going somewhere. I think we are onto something with this. Anyway, y'all have a great night. Keep rocking. I will catch you all later on Twitch. I'll catch you all later with a new video. Take it easy. Be good to each other. Be safe out there. And I will see you all next time.